The C word, the big C. That's the topic of this episode. Of course, I'm referring to confidence. Provocative? Well, when you consider how many of us wish we had more of it, yes, maybe it is. Mel Schilling is someone who has researched and worked in the field of confidence across her 20-year career. You might know her as the relationship expert on Married at First Sight in both the Australian and the UK versions, or through her multiple media and TV appearances over the last 5 years. She is a specialist in human behaviour and performance, and she's built a career as a therapist, business consultant and leadership coach for high-performing people. This episode got me thinking and feeling deeply, and I think it will for you as well. We navigate the shitstorm of hard things and the setbacks. We talk about the continuum of confidence, making sure you don't have too much, but also making sure you don't have enough. And Mel provides really practical, really accessible tools to get out of your own way. After an hour, you will feel more confident. I promise you. So get ready to dive into what holds you back, the tools of confidence, and the pure effervescence of the beautiful Mel Schilling. I'm Ellie Hill and welcome to Stand Out Life, a podcast dedicated to living boldly amongst the busyness and the mess of life. Mel, it's such a delight to be connecting with you.
Oh, thanks, Ellie. I'm delighted to be here. Let's have a good chat.
Absolutely ready to have a chat. You and I, we
Yeah.
connected a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic. I feel like everything is now measured pre-pandemic. Just didn't quite get into a studio, but
Yes.
it is great to be able to connect with you now. Something you've done between then and now is written a book called The
Yeah,
C Word.
just a little book.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I do remember our first conversation so clearly. I was in Bali. I was living in Bali at the time, and I can remember exactly where I was when I was sitting down having my conversation with you. Gosh, a lot has changed since then.
The
Yes,
world
the
has changed.
pandemic and the book.
Yes, yeah.
Mm.
How did the pandemic impact you and your work?
Well, I have to say it didn't affect me negatively, I've got to say. And I can't, you can see I'm tripping on the words as I'm saying it because I kind of feel guilty as I say it.
Mm,
I feel like I was one of the fortunate people who the events of the pandemic actually worked for me in a number of ways. Well, firstly, the strange thing, and this feels very weird to say, the strange thing is that television, and particularly reality television, is considered an essential service. I mean, go figure.
yeah, doesn't that just describe what's important to all of us?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. You could be a nurse or you could be on reality TV. Take your pick, you're still essential. So that's strange. That
Mm,
felt very weird as it was happening, realizing that, essential service workers were allowed to go to work and everybody else obviously had to stay home, particularly in Melbourne where I was living at the time. Yet I was allowed to go into a studio or sometimes film from home, and have all of the access to all of the resources that I needed, to do that work. But the other really, I guess, the real upside for me was having that time because yes, like a lot of people who work in our space, overnight almost a whole bunch of projects just dried up, particularly all of my speaking engagements, boom, gone. All the events were off. So I found myself with a lot of time, as we all did. And I've had a lot of projects on the back burner for many years. And I'm one of those creative thinkers that gets very distracted by shiny things. And I've got a lot of half-baked ideas. I've
Oh, I
got,
know that
yeah.
feeling.
You can relate. You're like a magpie too, chasing the
Yeah,
shiny
let's
things.
do
Yep.
that. Let's do that.
That's me too. So the pandemic for me, or at least lockdown for me, was such a great opportunity to pull some of those ideas off the back burner and onto the front and to go, okay, I've got a little bit of time now. I might just dive into these. And so I got my whiteboard out and just started going crazy with ideas and, looking at, okay, if I'm not doing X, what am I doing? What can I fill this, this creative void with? So one of the things that I pulled off the back burner was a TV series that I had been developing for a little while and went deep on that. I joined up with another indie production company, and we went into development and developed this project out to the point where it was ready for pitching and sale to TV networks. And we're still having conversations with TV networks all over the world about that now, because we actually got it to the point where it's ready to go. So that's exciting. That's watch this space on that one. And the other project was the book. I knew that I had, well, I think I have a few books in me. Actually, this was the first one, because I am very passionate about confidence. For me, it differentiates people in not just the social world, but also in the professional world and in the world of achievement. I often think that when we look at people at the top of their game, they're not always the most talented or the most skilled or the most educated. They're often the people who have, as many people say, they got balls. They're people who are actually prepared to stretch their comfort zone. Yeah, exactly. And to take those knocks, to have those failures, and to reframe them as just feedback, and to go, okay, that's great information. I know I can't do that. Let's try a different track. Boom, I'm going in this way. So confidence is something that is very interesting to me. And it's also, I see an incredible halo effect with people who are confident. We make these assumptions that because they present in a, let's say, a really articulate way, or they're someone who's really skilled at walking into a room and having charisma and owning that space, we make all these assumptions about them that are not always true. Take Donald Trump, for example. Because he is someone who is a strong speaker, who speaks with such conviction. Not that I agree with even one of his convictions, but that's beside the point. He speaks with conviction. So he had, the majority of America eating out of his hand, because they made these assumptions that because he's someone who speaks clearly and makes strong opinions very clearly understood by the masses, they made assumptions that he would be a good leader. And as we now know, he is not. So, I mean, that's a very extreme example, but, it makes us think about, people perhaps we've worked with or we've been in relationships with, and, people who present as a confident person, they seem to get an unfair advantage. So I thought, I want more people to have that. I want more people to get that unfair advantage. Good people, not Trump.
Yeah. Yes. It's so interesting, that kind of mix of conviction and confidence. The word that's coming up for me is it's provocative in some ways, because I think there is, and I've heard people say, I just need to have more confidence. Like there's a shop I could go to and, get it by the kilo, or, get it by bulk. How do you define, or how do we understand what confidence is?
Yeah. Well, first I'd probably start by talking about what it is not. And everything in that Trump example is an example of what it is not. So I think there are a lot of myths about confidence, often, and I think this often feeds into particularly women's reticence to want to put themselves forward and be seen as confident because of labeling. Particularly in the workplace, if women do behave in an assertive way, and for me, assertiveness is confidence in action, they can be at risk of being labelled aggressive or bossy or bitchy. What they're describing there is not confidence, that is overconfidence, or sometimes even narcissism, And at the other end of the continuum, of course, is underconfidence. So I think it's important that people understand that confidence needs to be, I think of the continuum between 1 and 10, and I like confidence to sit between about 5 and 8. So anything over that, it can be at the risk of your relationships. You can start self-sabotaging and overestimating your capability, and you can really start to lack self-awareness, I find, up there. And that's where that sort of self-centered narcissistic behavior starts to creep in. And of course, below that, then you're not going to be achieving much. So the way I kind of talk about creating confidence, as you said, if you could go to a shop and just buy it in bulk, this would be how you'd do it. You'd start by mastering fear. And it seems a little bit funny to talk about fear when we're talking about confidence, but for me, one can't exist without the other. You can't actually achieve confidence without that psychological tension that exists with managing fear, because fear is everywhere. It's normal, it's natural, it's inbuilt, as we know. And it's there for bloody good reasons, I think. I think it's really important that as humans, we can be really in touch with our fear responses and know what they are and when they're coming. For example, if you're someone who, when fear starts to creep in, maybe you start to notice a little bit of a sweaty palm, or maybe your breathing gets a bit shallow, maybe it's a dry throat for you. Whatever it is, get in touch with that stuff so that you can be super aware of those early warning signs when fear or anxiety is starting to happen for you. And then, I talk a lot in the book about how you can sort of walk alongside fear. This is not about overcoming fear. I don't think that's a thing. You hear all this trope on Instagram, everything you want is on the other side of fear, and, all this stuff, as if you can just make fear disappear, but you can't. And pardon me, we have automatic negative self-talk. It's inbuilt. It is there to protect us and to scan our environment for threat. So I think just getting a level of acceptance that some of that stuff is there. It's not going anywhere. So we need to be smart about the way we respond to it. Not react, but respond in a thoughtful, mindful way. So that's a starting point, being aware of that. And once you've got a good handle on fear, I think you can then start to step into courage. For me, what I've learned through doing my research for this book is that courage is something that emerges when what you want is bigger than what you fear. And I think there's a real delicate balance in there that people can sort of play with. But I think it's really helpful to think about, okay, here's the bucket over here on this side of all the things I'm scared of. But on the other side, here are the bigger things that I want in life. Here's my higher purpose, if you like, or my vision for my future. And of course, this taps into values and, all the things that are so important to you. An example for me of that type of courage from my own life was when I went through IVF. For me, I got very much in touch with what I wanted, what we wanted. The higher purpose here was to become parents, and we were, getting close to 42. I was getting close to 42, and I'd had a year of trying and miscarriages, and, there was a lot of fear. I had great fear of loss. I didn't want to have another pregnancy and have to go through another miscarriage. The fear of putting all these strange chemicals in my body, and, there was so much fear tied up with all of the unknowns that come with it. And the fear of, what if I constantly have the letdowns again? What if I bring more grief and loss into my family? But ultimately, that desire to be a mum was so much bigger than the fear. It absolutely ate the fear for breakfast. And it made it really clear for me that the only way I can get into that courage space is by holding that thing that I want really close and keeping it top of mind, because that's the way to overshadow the fears.
Were there things that were practical that helped you keep that front of mind? And thank you for sharing, because I think that the fear of going through IVF, miscarriages, it's a visceral fear. It's one we feel physiologically.
Yes.
So whilst we'll often think of fear as kind of the head game, there's like, I almost feel my body feeling that physiologically as well. And keeping the vision, the goal front of mind is great on the mornings we feel good, when we've had a good sleep, and hard when that fear kind of strikes our body. Practically, what helps you to keep that front of mind?
Yeah, really good question. I'm a big fan of reminders. Some people call them affirmations or mantras. I like to think of them as reminders. And this little gadget here, the phone or your laptop, I think is a great tool for reminders. So let's say, it is a goal of becoming a parent that's on your mind. Have the wallpaper on your phone, a picture of you with your niece or nephew, or of a child, or of just something that represents that goal that you're working towards. Set little questions. I often talk to my clients about setting little questions as reminders in your calendar to pop up, and just ask yourself, what story am I telling myself at the moment? So just to make sure you're staying on top of that internal monologue, because we all know that the fear thoughts creep in. If you are going through IVF, it's very natural to start, getting into that worry mode about what could go wrong. But then if you can have that reminder to sort of stop those thoughts, challenge them, flip them over and go, well, what could go right? How would I feel if I was holding that baby in my arms? So I think having really practical thought stoppers like those in your day is really, really helpful.
I love that practical, pull you out of your own head, your own thinking, and just to change the cycle there as well. And, that's really useful in dealing with any hurdles, setbacks. In that example, I know there'd be plenty of people listening that might have been through IVF and it's not been successful. And whilst this is a particular example we're talking about, but it can be examples of other areas where people build themselves up, build up a level of confidence, but it doesn't go the way we had planned. Or ultimately there is an outcome where we have to make the call to go, how do I let go of that vision or expand that vision or change that vision? What would be your recommendations for dealing with the kind of ultimate setbacks that might come our way?
Yeah. Well, I think the first step is self-compassion, because it happens. It is part of life. Things go wrong. And, sometimes we can put everything we have into working toward a goal. And for whatever reasons, maybe it's beyond our control, it doesn't work. So I think it's so important to be kind to yourself when that happens, and allow yourself to feel whatever you're feeling. Maybe there is a time for a bit of wallowing in it. That's okay. That's human. Bit of self-pity, never hurt anyone, as long as it doesn't go on for too long. So allowing that and allowing yourself to have that period of time for feeling the feelings, the regret, mourning what could have been, because it's so important, that you allow yourself to process that stuff. And once you've done that, I think another really good step is to get back in touch with the things that bring you joy. And that may be related to that goal or it might not. My sister has recently been through an example of this in her career. She got to the very top of her career and she was a paramedic, and spent years doing postgraduate study, extra work, making sacrifices in her family to get to the top of her career. And she got there and didn't like it. Wasn't what she thought. She literally climbed the mountain, got to the top, didn't like the view. So she found herself, in this kind of situation, and actually her whole experience really inspired a chapter in the book, because the question you've asked is a really common one. How do you rebuild confidence after it's been battered out of you? Because that's part of life too. So that self-compassion is definitely the first step. The next one is to get back in touch with what brings you joy. My sister, as a kid, rode horses, and that was her thing. She was into horses. I was into dancing and boys. She loved her horses. And, she's now got, 3 teenage children and, a busy life, but she's gone and got another horse. And so now at, almost 50, she started horse riding again. And that is bringing her immense joy and, helping her just get back in touch with who she is as a person without, that career goal. So that's something I've, learned a lot from. And I can see how that can extrapolate across all different situations in life. If you can experience the loss, take those first two steps, the self-compassion and then the reconnecting with something that brings you joy. For me, I see that as allowing you to get to that almost ground zero again so you can start to build confidence. Those things in and of themselves don't build confidence, but they enable you to get back in touch with, your you-ness in order to start. So then you can start to, re-examining fear. What are these new fears that are coming up now that everything's shifted, everything's changed, and examining that, understanding that, accepting that. Then you can start to go, okay, setting new goals, a new path. How can I start to slowly, carefully, and self-lovingly expand my comfort zone again? So for me, it is, and I use that word expand very intentionally. I don't believe in jumping outside the comfort zone. I don't think that serves us. It only puts us into anxiety, and we all know we're not at our best when we're anxious. But if we can start to gradually expand that comfort zone and bring things that are growth promoting into our comfort zone, then we're going to be in a much stronger position to feel safe in order to grow.
I think that's such a critical point because, again, there can be narratives or stories or memes or things out there around burn the bridges,
Yeah, just do it.
Just do it, It's that thing you've always, quit your job and you'll be fine. It's, mortgages are also going up and,
right.
There is this, I think that chance to be able to expand, to see that stretch and move beyond. But understand that is here. I mean, the other one, I'm interested in your take on this one too, where I've heard plenty of people going, if it's not a hell yeah, then it's a no. So, well, sometimes I know the things that have stretched me enough were the ones that I did have a little bit of anxiety about.
Right.
I wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah.
But I do get that intuition of going, this feels okay, but it doesn't feel like a hell yeah.
Yeah. I agree. Look, I think all of those really simplistic, binary ways of looking at life are great for a meme because, they make a great little soundbite or a little image. But I think human nature is much more nuanced than that. And I agree with you, Ellie. I think, some of the most monumental events in my life have been I've been sitting on the fence completely confused about what to do, and that's part of the human condition. So I think one of the great skills that we can learn is how to sit with that kind of free floating anxiety that comes with that uncertainty and still make a decision, not be immobilized by it.
I want to talk a little bit about your own confidence and your shift in a career. So with a background in psychology, to make that leap or that I've read wanting to combine psychology and performance was something, a realization and a moment that you came to, and then putting that into how can I put myself out there? A lot of people listening will know you from being the relationship expert on maths in Australia and also in the UK. Talk to me a little bit about that shift and that transition to go from your psychology work into reality TV.
Well, I guess the pragmatic way that I did it is kind of interesting. Because I feel like I was finally practicing what I preach. So, I've talked for years about confidence, even when I was, doing loads of work in corporate, talking about all different aspects of leadership, it would often, for me, come back to confidence because I would recognize that as a gap for people. And the first season of Married at First Sight went on air in Australia, and I wasn't in it. It was just on. It was a different cast. And a lot of my friends and family, particularly my sister and my hubby, said to me, you should be doing this. You should be on this show. This is your bag. This is because by that stage I had retrained as a coach and specifically as a dating coach as well. And so I had a real passion, for working with single people and helping them to get over these fears and step into new relationships. And at this stage, I was starting to do a little bit of TV spots, morning shows and evening shows, and, you know, just sort of coming in with that expert commentary around sort of mental health and well-being and confidence and relationships. So I had a little bit of a portfolio and, you know, a little bit, a few little snippets that I managed to cobble together as a makeshift kind of show reel. And I thought, okay, this is actually something I want to go for. This is, I believe that this is something that is so well aligned with all of my interests and my skill sets. And, you know, I know I had a deep knowing that this was something that I could do and could do really well and enjoy, more importantly. So I started working my network and talking to the few little people that, not little people, they weren't little, they were normal sized people, but the people that I knew in TV, and started gathering some intel about, you know, who are the players here? Who do I need to talk to about this show? Because I'd like to put myself forward, and found out who was casting it and sent through this little example of my work, and basically said to them, I'd really love to meet you. I'd love to talk to you about how I would do things differently. Are you open to a different conversation? And sure enough, we went and met for a wine. It was hilarious. It was such a clandestine meeting. I remember wearing my trench coat, like I was literally like I was undercover. We met for a wine in a little bar in Sydney. It was all very top secret. And basically just talked to this producer about my ideas for the show and how, you know, what I saw, you know, this show could achieve and how I would do it differently. And at that stage, they said to me, look, we have 3 experts on the panel, but we're open to one more. So we would be happy to have 4. So let's explore this. So we did, and, you know, went through this whole process and, you know, loads of auditions and screen tests with the other people in the show, and, you know, eventually moved into season 1, and I've now done 11 seasons. No, I think, 9 in Australia and 2 in the UK.
Amazing. If I can dissect that a little bit, what I'd love to know, and again, if we come back to confidence, and I'll use this word only because I think sometimes it can be the story that people think in their head, but the audacity to say to a producer, I think you could do it differently, is beautiful and amazing, and no doubt put you on the radar. The confidence to do that is probably something that you're talking to people about in terms of the confidence that they can tap into. What helped you with that?
Something I remember doing at the time, because of course I had doubts, you know, yes, it does take audacity and, you know, as we say in Melbourne, more front than mire. I love that. My parents used to say that. It takes a lot of front to do that. I did have doubts.
Yep.
And so something that I remember doing at the time was some scenario planning. So kind of playing out all the different scenarios that could happen. And I think this is a really good one for people to do, because it enables you to, by visualizing, to step into that worst case scenario, and to feel the feelings. So let's say it's a bit of humiliation, bit of rejection, bit of, oh my God, I'm dying kind of moment. And then to actually visualize yourself working through that, moving past it, and guess what? Nobody dies. So I remember doing that, because I can actually remember visualizing myself getting to this meeting, sharing my ideas, and having this person say, well, who do you think you are? You're just a nobody. You've never done any TV. What makes you think you could do it better than anyone else? And of course, all that imposter syndrome stuff was coming up. Absolutely was coming up at that time, because, you know, I was putting myself in a situation where I was definitely starting to take on the identity of a television person, because that's something that I really believe is important for people to do when you're working towards a goal, to embody the goal, to act as if you're already there. And I don't mean this in an arrogant way at all. You know, I don't believe, you know, that's going to win any races at all. I think it's about still having absolute self-awareness about the way that you're communicating, but to believe that you can do it. and you're in the process of making it happen. So for me, that was it. It was the combination of scenario planning, thinking through the worst case scenario and going, okay, the worst case scenario here is somebody says no to me. Okay, I can deal with that. And guess what? I can turn that into an opportunity to ask for feedback and to learn about what my gaps are and actually try a different tack, because I'm in no rush. It's not like this goal had a time limit on it. So that really helped me.
Powerful to be, because I think what you've done is actually put a voice to the stories in our head anyway. So rather than it kind of stopping our behaviour because it's kind of still sitting in our head, those fears is actually, let's articulate it. What if they did say that? What would I do? How might I respond? Would that sting in the moment? Yes. But then what the next step would be is really powerful. You talked before about mastering fear. Fear is always going to be there whenever we turn up with confidence. One of the biggest fears that stops or suppresses confidence is, what will other people think? Or this fear of being scrutinized. And even your example, you go 11 seasons of Married at First Sight, really putting yourself out there. And the confidence, as you say, to align the kind of work that you want to do, that you love to do. The flip side of that, it also comes with public scrutiny. How have you dealt with or continue to deal with the public scrutiny, which can be that surfacing of the fear of what will people think? Unfortunately, with social media and media in general, sometimes we see those things in headlines or in, on websites.
Yep,
How have you dealt with public scrutiny?
Well, it's good that you're asking me now, because I'm actually in a really good place with my relationship with other people's opinions of me now. But if you'd asked me 4 years ago, I was in the thick of it. So yeah, it was 2018. I experienced a massive backlash in the media and social media based on something that I said on screen that was not presented in context. And I was labelled the underlying belief was that I was biased. That's essentially what people were saying. Yep. But the labelling around that was, toxic feminist and all that sort of thing. I had the men's movement out against me. I was getting death threats, rape threats. There was a petition to have me sacked, and I think about 70,000 people signed that. There were several articles a day in the tabloids. One of them said I was Australia's most hated woman. I mean, it was so extreme. It was incredible. Yeah. And it did spill over into real life too. It wasn't just online. I had an awful experience at an airport where I was by myself and standing in line, and I just wanted the ground to swallow me up. I remember I had a hoodie on, and I put my hood on, and I was literally and figuratively hiding. It was so awful. I felt so conspicuous. My paranoia went through the roof. I'd sort of thought everyone was staring at me and talking about me, and I was really hyper vigilant. I was jumping. Someone moved towards me, and I actually squealed. It was awful. I was so anxious. It was a really, really tough time. But big lessons, huge lessons from that for me, because, I guess after that, I had to make a decision. Do I want to continue with this? Am I going to continue to put myself in a situation where I'm knowingly exposing myself to this kind of risk? I'm not naive. I know that that's a huge part of the industry that I now work in. And so I made a conscious choice to continue and put some things in place to make sure that, it wasn't going to affect me in such a negative way in future. So one of the things is, surrounding myself with the right people, support group. And now I have the most, from a business perspective, I have a team in the UK and a team in Australia working with me, who support my the media side of myself and my business, but also my business side. So that helps for feeling supported. Obviously I have an amazing family and friendship group around me that I can really easily debrief on this stuff with. I have incredible mentors as well. When this all blew up, my beautiful mentor, Sandy Ray, who's a senior psychologist and does a lot of media work as well, was my absolute crutch. she was there and really helpful for helping me put this stuff in perspective and deal with it. But now I have a very different relationship with social media. It is so easy now for me to read something and instantly block, delete, move on. I don't internalize it. It's very much like I've got a shield, and it doesn't get through to me on an emotional level at all. I have managed to create a really strong boundary, I think, between myself and the real me and, the professional me, the bits that they see of me through the TV, which is not the whole me. It's a very highly curated, edited version of things that I say. For example, on a commitment ceremony, that can last, 8 or 10 hours, and you might see 25, 30 minutes of it.
Yeah, the curation of it means that it can be different to how it actually kind of comes across. Look, really appreciate you sharing that, because it's where we talk about kind of confidence and fear, it's often that kind of unsaid fear, and your story is the amplification of all of those fears, and to hear the importance of having people around you, having those professionals around you to really kind of support that, and that you can make that decision and come out the other side is really powerful as well. In terms of stories around confidence, I know a lot of your work is predominantly building up women's confidence, and you talk a little bit about the gender difference in confidence between men and women. And you mentioned before some of the stories that women are told that if you're too confident, you're bossy or you're arrogant, you need to just kind of be the Australian way, is being knocked down a peg or two. And what are some of the stories that I guess women might hear or internalize around confidence? And if we think about that continuum, I know I love that sense of you're somewhere between a 5 and an 8, but sometimes we're worried that if we go into a 5, I'm actually a 9, that I'll become become arrogant, and I don't want to be, and so I won't, and I need to put other people first and not me. What are some of those stories that you've heard and coached and guided women through in order for them to really fall into that sweet spot of confidence?
Yeah. Well, I think to look at those stories that we tell ourselves, we have to go back to our childhood socialization and the gender differences in the way that, particularly if we look at sort of parenting in the 60s, 70s, and even 80s, and the difference in the way that parents would reinforce boys and girls. They'd reinforce boys for being competitive and driven and leader-like and taking risks. And we'd reward the girls for being kind and nurturing and sharing and all of those, traditionally softer skills. I'm so pleased to see that this is starting to shift now in parenting and gender, and I really celebrate that. But I think, we've taken all of those messages with us into adulthood. And, I so often hear, women, it comes out in our language. And I wonder if some of your listeners might be familiar with this. We, particularly as women, and particularly in Australia too, we have this tendency to apologize for our existence. We'll start a sentence with, "Oh, sorry, Ellie, I was just wondering," or we'll be in a meeting and we'll just go, "Oh, sorry to interrupt. I'm just wondering if maybe, I doubt if this is important, but perhaps we could consider this, but maybe," all of these qualifiers and apologies, and this is so common. I hear this in, grown, accomplished women all the time. It is just, we are taught that we need to be apologetic for our existence and not take up too much space. So a lot of the work that I do starts here. And, I talk to my clients, and it's in the book as well, about the idea of the little girl hangover. So that's not to do with underage drinking. It's about those habits that probably served us well when we were kids, But when we bring them into our adulthood, they're just plain dysfunctional and kind of funny. So, and, I think it helps to laugh at ourselves on this as well. So, some of those things are, like the bratty response, when you're 5 and you don't get the lolly that you wanted, you might have a tantrum. You might lie on the floor and hold your breath. You might scream and shout. But if you're you're 35 and you're in the workplace and your boss doesn't agree with a project suggestion that you make, if you lie on the floor and hold your breath, it's going to have a very different response from people.
Career limiting move.
Right, exactly. You start shouting, slamming doors, or what you might see more realistically in the workplace is passive aggression. So, you might be giving it a fine. Fine, okay, fine, when you're not fine. Or you might freeze someone out and stop talking to them when you really have something to say, So there's a lot of these childish behaviours that as women we bring into our adulthood that no longer serve us. Baby talk is another one. I hear this in, again, accomplished professional women who will, when they want to present an idea that has some risk associated with it or some vulnerability, some exposure, they might go, I've got a little idea. Let me tell you about my idea. I know, it's cringe, isn't it?
Oh, I know. I'm giggling because I've heard it and I've probably said it.
Yeah, exactly. We all do it. I mean, this is not about blaming at all.
No,
this is just about looking at ourselves.
Recognizing it.
Yeah, we do it. And I see this a lot in relationships too, where a woman will go into that sort of infantile mode as a way of getting what she wants from a man, and it can actually lead to some really problematic behaviours because it's essentially diminishing your power, whether that's in the workplace or in a relationship. It's sort of saying, okay, in order to not threaten you, I'm going to diminish my power through my voice, make my little voice, or through the way that I'm putting myself forward, and it's self-sabotage, it is. It is a form of getting in your own way. So I love the idea of women starting to just get really aware of all of these things so that it's not just happening automatically and unconsciously, but, to be able to say to yourself before you go into an important meeting, okay, I know that I'm going to be a little bit heightened in this meeting. I'm going to get a bit stressed. And one of the things I do when I get stressed is I get a dry throat. So I'm going to make sure I've got my water with me. That's my first thing. I also know that I have a tendency to get a sweaty palm. So I'm going to have this hanky in my pocket or tissue so I can soak up some of the sweat in my pocket before I shake that person's hand. So a couple of practical things there that might help me. Okay, I know when I go to put forward my idea in this meeting that I'm going to feel nervous about it. My voice will naturally go up. So I'm going to be aware of that. I'm going to take some deep conscious breaths before I speak, before anyone's aware that I'm ready to speak. When I'm ready, I'm going to think about my voice. I'm going to slow it down. I'm going to use pause. And I'm going to be aware of the tone of my voice too. So you can see how that changes. Yeah.
Allow the space to be present, to recognise that is so powerful. When you mentioned before the apologising, the sorry, it's rampant.
Yeah.
A lot of the work that I do in corporate, and I know you've heard this as well, is for female leaders to recognise how often we apologise. And I know I've done some work where even in our team, where we were trying to stop some of that kind of behaviour and just recognise that with humour with each other. Yeah. And so the standard saying used to become, well, what have you done wrong? Because you only apologise if you've done something wrong, and if you haven't, then stop it. So
do you know what? I do that. Oh. And do you know what I think makes it even funnier, gets them laughing? When they go, sorry, I go, oh, did you fart? Is that what you're apologising
No
for?
one should apologise for farting.
Exactly. We all love
always funny.
Yeah, it's always funny. And it's a good way to break the ice and, if someone gets someone laughing at themselves. But I
Yeah.
really loved I'm not sure if you saw the piece of research that Hewlett Packard did a couple of years ago around oh, so interesting. So they got a group of men and a group of women and got them to look at a position description and make a decision about whether or not they would put themselves forward. So what they found was the men went through that criteria, and when they met 60% of the criteria, they said to themselves, yep, great, put myself forward. What percentage do you think women had to meet before they applied?
Oh, look, it's going to be way less than 60%, isn't it?
Well, no, the other way around. They had to meet
Oh,
100%.
meat. Yes.
Yeah, they
Yeah,
said,
yeah, of
women
course.
said to
Yep.
themselves, unless I meet all of the criteria,
Mm.
I'm not going to
Yep.
put myself forward. So that was so powerful for me. The men would look at that 40% gap and go, yeah, I can make that leap. I'm going to jump. I'm going to step into that 40% of doubt
Mm.
and I'm going to make it work for me. Whereas women wouldn't even jump if there was 1% gap. So I think that was actually one of the catalysts for me to write the book. When I read that piece of research, it just made all the thoughts and ideas that I had about the gender gap in confidence so concrete, and
Mm.
I had to write it. That
Why this is
it was
important.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yep.
it's
Yep.
about influencing that gap, the confidence gap, and what we can do about it.
Mm. Yep. Yeah. Come back to if it's 60%, give it a crack.
Yeah,
We can
yes,
figure
yeah,
out the
that's
40%.
right.
Yep.
Yes.
Put it in there. You talk a lot about, and you have even through this conversation, emotional bravery. So, really kind of stepping out of our comfort zone. And I love that kind of sense of expanding outside of our comfort zone. If, the confidence is a dance. So, what if people do expand out, kind of put their neck out a little bit and it didn't quite work? Even your example of speaking up at a meeting, mindful of my voice, mindful of my tone, and I felt like I delivered, but it didn't get heard, or it did get heard, but nothing's happened.
Yeah.
How do we then come back into that bravery that's required to go again?
I think a really strong tool to have in any of these courageous moments is a buddy or a mate. So, someone, if we use the workplace example, maybe it's your work wife, maybe it's your close friend at work, maybe it's a leader, maybe it's someone who's senior to you, maybe it's a peer. Being able to have someone that you trust who can sort of be like a bit of a champion for you and even unofficially and to be able to say to them before the meeting, okay, I'm going to be putting this idea forward, I'm feeling pretty wobbly about it, can you just be there with me, but also afterwards can I debrief it with you, will you give me some really honest and kind feedback once I've done this? Because I think the thing that makes a lot of people spiral into the overthinking mode is being alone and not having that voice of reason or voice of support to help debrief that. So I think that is so important. Or maybe it's your partner when you get home, it could be anyone that you choose, but I think making sure that it's not you don't feel isolated in that event is so incredibly important. And then I'm a huge fan of journaling, so taking the opportunity after that event to excuse me, taking the opportunity after that event to spend a bit of time sitting down and writing about what that experience was like for you, where you think, at what point did you decide to take the leap into that courageous moment? Could you have chosen a different moment? Really get quite analytical, from that bird's eye view, try to step out of the emotion and just really pick it apart and be quite smart and strategic in the way that you're thinking about how did I do it that time? Okay, maybe I'll shift the dial on one thing or another. Maybe it's about the people that I address in the room or the amount of time I take. There's so many variables there you could play with to try it differently next time. And just keep coming back to that notion that failure is just feedback.
The importance of writing it down, and then it kind of removes it from almost you, and you can become quite analytical about it. I have to ask, being the relationship expert, is that the same with dating? Because we're talking about matters of the heart. It's quite vulnerable to put yourself out there, whether it's to ask for a date or to be kind of emotionally exposed. So we talk about workplaces, but then is it the same approach if it comes to relationships?
Ali, I've been accused of being very unromantic in my dating advice, and this is why. I'm going to say yes. I think it is the same. I really do. The parallels between the work that I do with single people looking for love and couples and people in the workplace are incredible. I actually talk about a strategic approach to dating, which might sound terribly clinical and not romantic. But in my experience, if you get all of the strategy and the vision and the tactics and all that stuff that we do in our workplace, if you get all of that right in your dating life, then you're more likely to meet with someone compatible. And when you meet with someone compatible, the romance and the spark is more likely to flow. So, yes, it's not romantic, but I do believe in a very strategic approach to dating. Because look, let's face it, you wouldn't arrive at a job interview having not looked at the job description or not done research on the company or, wearing moccasins, So why not apply that to, the most important relationship of your life?
Yeah, and it is that even a job interview, you're assessing them as much as they're assessing
Yes.
you. The same in kind of relationships.
Yes. Give
And
yourself
that
some
can
power.
be romantic relationships. It can be friendships. It can be all of those different areas as well. There are times though where we can kind of let ourselves off the hook a little bit, where we don't necessarily hold ourselves accountable, where we might turn up to the job interview in moccasins. I don't know.
Yeah.
And one of the things I think you deliver exceptionally well, and have a reputation from, is those key questions, and holding people accountable to their actions. How do we hold ourselves accountable when it can be easy enough to go, yeah, that's fine, but not me, or I'll just sit this one out, or I'll kind of, yeah, sure, I want a new job, but we'll just see if one arrives. How do we hold ourselves and be really honest with ourselves about our own actions?
Yeah, I think this is one of those questions that everybody needs to ask, because I think one of the quirks of being human is we do let ourselves off and we do undermine ourselves. We do get in our own way. This is never more obvious than in the field of addiction. For example, this is where we see this very, very strongly. But we can extrapolate from that into other areas of life that are not so extreme. I think the key to all of this is self-awareness. I think in my work, the times I do need to get really direct and ask those very challenging questions is with people who are not showing self-awareness, who are not reflecting, who are not thinking about the impact of what they're saying and doing on other people or on their own outcomes, who are just on autopilot. I have no time for people who are on autopilot. I just think that you're skimming the surface of life. It's in order to have a big, full, interesting, messy life, you have to take some risks and you have to think about, okay, I've taken that risk. It didn't go well. What could I do differently? You've got to put your ego aside, You've got to be able to swallow a bit of that pride and go, okay, I didn't actually do that as well as I could have. What can I do differently next time? And then it becomes a really positive, constructive thing. Otherwise, you just kind of, you become stagnant. Yeah. You can't move on from that. And it's kind of pathetic.
And we don't want to be that.
No.
Not when there's this offer, as you say, of living the big full life. And yeah, what does that take as we step into that? If we come back to when you talk about the confidence, and you actually guide people through 4 key things. We've touched on a few of those. Fear mastery, so recognizing fear, putting a name to it, and then kind of facing that. Courage, but a smart level of courage. Having a deep confidence. And then the final one is around fluid competence. Yeah. Talk to me, what do you mean and how do you define fluid competence?
Well, again, I'd start by saying how I don't define it. So for me, I'm not a great fan of the idea of high performance. I think, oh, am I losing you? I think we've got a poor connection.
It will continue recording at your end.
Okay.
I've just lost your visual as well if I've gone,
okay.
But it will
yes,
keep recording.
You have. Okay. I'd start by defining what fluid competence is not. It's not high performance. I don't like the term high performance because I think if taken literally, it's a recipe for burnout. I think there are times where high performance is required, for a period, leading up to the peak of a project, for example. But I think we can learn a lot from sports people here where, they don't, if they're leading up to, let's say, the Olympics, they don't train at 100% every day. They'll have certain periods where they're at 40%, 30%, 80%, 20%, and they ensure that they are managing their performance levels and their training levels in a way that's sustainable, and it's not going to lead to burnout. So I think we can learn a lot from that, in terms of our own lives and our own careers, and work towards optimal performance rather than high performance. And for me, optimal performance is really dynamic. It's a process of constantly self-monitoring, checking, how am I going? Am I putting in the amount of energy that this task requires, whilst also ensuring that I can attend to my self-care or the relationships with my family, with my team? So it's I see that optimal performance as a way of really of avoiding burnout, because you can't go into burnout if you're constantly self-monitoring and checking yourself and being aware of your energy levels and changing them if you're using too much or too little.
That, checking in on where you're at and then what's kind of guiding and shifting from here. Knowing that confidence comes from competence. So the capability of doing things, being able to see and go, oh, yeah, actually that worked, or that I was able to get that project done or have that conversation or go out for a run longer than what I thought I would. That builds confidence and really
absolutely
is key.
Yep.
I want to talk to you about something that I think we're not very good at, probably women are less good at, and that is celebrating along the way. So often we will undermine our efforts and go, yeah, sure, I did that, but it wasn't as good, or I could have done it better, and we beat ourselves up because we know the things that we didn't quite achieve but no one else does. How do you celebrate the little wins, and what encouragements would you have for people to recognise that?
Oh, I think this is a great topic, Ellie. And I agree. And I'm not always good at it either. I can be guilty of falling into that. No, I don't get to celebrate until I've achieved 100%, But of course, often our goals are iterative, aren't they? And there are bits that happen along the way that, if we chunk it down, it's so motivating to reward ourselves along the way. This is something that I know I need to get better at as well. And definitely with my hubby, this is something that we work towards together, because he knows that I have that tendency to not want to celebrate until I've achieved, the ultimate thing. And some of the things, projects I work on can be years long. So, we are very good at going, right, this has been a milestone this week. Let's actually open a bottle of champagne on Friday, because yes, the whole thing's not completed, but look what we achieved. I think that's really, really helpful, Yeah, but I I definitely can't speak from this one as an expert because it's something that I'm very much a work in progress in. When I was in a business partnership years ago with another psychologist, and we put a practice in our business that every Friday we'd celebrate. We'd call it Fig Jam. Do you know what that stands for? It might it might
I've heard
involve
it,
some
but
swearing.
yeah, go,
Fuck
swear
I'm
away.
good, just ask me. And so we'd have a
I
fig
love it.
jam, it'd be in our business diary for a Friday afternoon, and we'd have a fig jam at the end of every week. And I think I need to reinstitute that into my life because I think it was a really good thing for us to do.
Yeah, particularly when we're
Mm,
talking about confidence, because it's sometimes the things that we want to celebrate aren't necessarily the things you put on Instagram.
yeah,
It's the small
yeah.
thing that I got up at 5:30 and I went down and watched the sunrise.
Mm,
And the reason why that's important is because I've been saying for 2 months I've wanted to do it, and I finally did it on Tuesday.
yes.
But it's not necessarily something we go other people might see as a major thing, but I think
Mm,
it is just so important, and that tie back into confidence is really key.
yeah.
What are you excited about in terms of the conversation of confidence happening more and more so? Like, what are you, whether it's from the book or whether it's more people that you've been talking to around confidence, what excites you around the way women in particular can change their relationship with confidence?
I love that I'm starting to hear women talk about doing courageous things with pride. So I have a small group of women I'm working with at the moment, and it's such a joy because we've got this little group. We've completed a program. They've completed my program, and we now just have this little informal group and just jump into this group. It's a WhatsApp group, and share little examples of where they've actually put these courageous actions into play, and little selfies of themselves, for example, doing a power pose before going into a meeting. I've got one of my clients doing that, and she's loving it, absolutely loving
Awesome.
it. And just the joy that she's experienced because she's starting to do things that she never would have dreamed of in the past. She actually applied for a job that was 3 levels above her own, and she got it. And this was just unheard of. And so, for me, seeing that the idea for me that a woman can manage fear, step into courage, and do something that feels extraordinary to her, and to get the subsequent confidence from doing that, like you were saying before, when you've achieved something, it boosts that self-efficacy and your confidence goes up. And to feel proud of that, that's the thing I'm excited about. Not to be ashamed of it, not to say, oh,
Mm.
sorry, 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 but to go, yes, look what I did. I am woman, hear me roar.
That sense of pride is often what we're missing.
Mm,
That's powerful, and there's something like I've got goosebumps just as you're saying that, because there's
yeah.
something that then I think is a role model. It pulls others around you, whether
Yes.
it's the next generation, whether it's friends, whether it's family, whether it's other people. There's something that goes, oh, maybe that project I've got on the back burner, or that little thing or that conversation that's been niggling me that I know I should have, I could go and do that and just
Yes.
see. That's really powerful.
Yeah.
Mel, I could keep having this conversation. There's so much more.
Yeah, me too.
I love that you've put out this book called The C Word, and we're going to put all the links in for people to be able to jump on and share. I feel more confident an hour in, so this
Yes.
is awesome.
My work is done.
If I ask you my final question, the name of this podcast is called Stand Out Life. What does it mean to you when you hear that term? What does it mean to live a standout life?
For me, a standout life is about doing things that are extraordinary. A standout life is not just living on autopilot. It is about stepping into the fear, into the courage space and actually expanding your world and testing your limits and just seeing how far you can possibly go. That stand out to me.
I'd sign up for the extraordinary. Sounds great. Thank you, Mel. You've been extraordinary. I've loved this conversation.
Oh, thanks, Ali. I've loved it too.